really well. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Hi everybody, I'm Natalie. Thanks for all being here. So does anybody know the origin of the word bedlam? It's a noun meaning a scene of uproar and confusion. You don't have to answer, but according to the text Psychology of a Changing World, the origin of the word comes from an activity that happened in the late 15th century and early 16th century. During these times, the mentally ill of any kind were forced to live in insane asylums, which often didn't take good care of them, like they were barely cared for, they just kind of wandered around. It was more like they were all just put there so that people didn't have to deal with them. And in one such hospital in London, in St. Mary's Bethlehem Hospital, people could go and purchase tickets so you could watch the mentally insane just, have hallucinations or manic episodes or whatever. So it was kind of like, you would just go to a circus and watch these sick people. So that's where the word bedlam comes from. Now, in my audience survey, over half of you said that you know or knew someone who's clinically depressed, just, like actually sick depression, not just sad, is what that means. But major depressive disorder is the actual name for depression, and it affects approximately 14.8 million American adults. Hello. We're about 6.7% of the U.S. population aged 18 and older in a given year, and that's according to ADAA.org, which stands for the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. That was updated in 2014. It's a sad but unfortunately very common mental disorder. I personally am a psychology major. I'm going to graduate at the end of next year, so I've taken pretty much all of my psychology courses. I just have to take a couple gen eds. And I also have struggled with depression in my life, so I know the seriousness and the struggles that come with it, and I can kind of see both sides of the coin, if you will. So today I'm going to talk about some of the facts of depression, and also just a little bit about some treatment options that people have. Let me first explain major depressive disorder. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, called the DSM for short, it's the DSM-5 now, is the most widely accepted book for studying and diagnosing people with mental disorders. So if you go to a therapist, they use that book to decide pretty much what's wrong with you, what isn't wrong with you. So that's where I get my information from for the diagnostic and other information about it. So in order to be diagnosed with depression, you have to exhibit certain behaviors or symptoms. The first and the most obvious would be that you have to be depressed for most of the day or most of the time during the day. The second thing that you would have to do is you have to show a loss of interest and activities. Like you don't want to go out anymore, you don't want to hang out with your friends. Like for example, if you really like hiking or bike riding, you don't want to do that anymore, you just stay inside, you don't want to hike, and you don't want to bike ride, you want to be inside and away from everybody. Another criteria would be significant weight loss or gain. Basically any kind of change in your diet that you don't do purposely, like you just lose your appetite or you're suddenly hungry all the time, would be considered a part of that criteria. If you sleep too much or if you have insomnia, either extreme is another criteria. And a loss of self-worth or self-love. So if someone's depressed, they might think, I hate myself, everybody hates me, I'm not supposed to be here, I don't belong here, I'm not good enough. Those kind of thoughts are depressed thoughts, which would fit that criteria for a diagnosis. And also the loss of the ability to concentrate. So someone who is maybe an A or B student, it suddenly becomes a C and D and F student because they can't concentrate on anything because they're off in their head. Maybe you lose your job because you can't focus anymore. You go in but you can't do anything, so you get fired. And finally, unfortunately, thoughts of death or suicide is one of the criteria. So that includes, I want to die, I wish I would die, I wish I had never been born, anything like that. A suicide note, a suicide plan, or obviously a suicide attempt, unfortunately fits that criteria. And this goes throughout the entire DSM pretty much. To be diagnosed with any mental disorder, you can't have it. The symptoms cannot be caused due to an outside source like drugs. So if you take drugs, then technically you can't have depression because the drugs might be causing it. Also, the symptoms have to be changing and affecting a person's life in some way. So your life has to be worse because of these symptoms. So if somehow you have all these symptoms, but you are like, I'm fine, and you keep doing everything that you're supposed to, then you don't have depression. You have to exhibit 5 of the symptoms that I listed, just at least 5. And in general, therapists want you to have most of these symptoms for about 2 weeks, give or take. Doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, you missed a day, you weren't depressed on Wednesday, you're not depressed. Just like in general, 2 weeks is about the time they'd wait to diagnose someone. There are also some factors that can put people more at risk for getting depression, such as if it runs in the family, then you are at an increased risk of developing it or having something trigger it. It doesn't mean 100%, just means like slightly more at risk. Other mental illnesses can also increase your risk of getting depression. Unfortunately, it is a buy one, get one free. So if you have any kind of anxiety disorder, you're more likely to get depression. If you have obsessive compulsive disorder, like a pretty severe case, you are more likely to get depression. If you have a physical disability, whether you were born with it or if something happens and you get injured in your life, you are more likely to get depressed. Something that I also found interesting was that there was no difference between genders developing depression. Women were recorded to have higher suicide attempt rates, but men and women are equally depressed, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. While depression is a terrible disease, there are options and there's ways for people to help themselves and help others. So, switching gears. Usually when you hear the word therapy, you probably think of somebody laying on a couch and they're complaining and the therapist says, and how does that make you feel? And how does that make you feel? And that is one type of therapy that you can have, but it's not as common as like movies and TV shows would have you believe. It's a little less common than that. And there are many type of therapies and treatments for depression, but there was actually a study done, and it was published in the Journal of Psychiatric Research. It was published in 2016, that exercise and going outside can really help people who are struggling with depression to get better and help cope with their depression. So any type of therapy or any type of drug or anything you're doing to help deal with your depression, if you exercise and go outside and get more sunlight, then that'll help. So it's not a treatment on its own, but it is like an aid. So the type of therapy I'll talk about is a very popular type of therapy today. It's one of the more popular ones, especially for really common mood disorders like anxiety and depression, is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's kind of related to like a behaviorist style of psychology, which if you don't know, if you think of Pavlov's dog experiment, where he would put a steak in front of a dog, the dog would drool, he would ring a bell. He did it over and over and over again until all he had to do was ring the bell, and the dog would drool, no steak needed. It's sort of like that style therapy, but cognitive behavioral therapy uses that as an idea, but takes it more compassion. So there is a little bit of like, how does that make you feel combined into it. And the main goal of cognitive behavioral therapy is to help change your perception of what's happening to you, because you can't always change a situation. So it's usually a shorter type of therapy. Like, you don't sign up and you're not like, I'm going to be in therapy for 10 years, because you usually go 10 to 30 sessions, and each session is extremely proactive. So you have like a goal. You would walk away with homework to help try and change your thoughts. So instead of trying to accomplish everything while you're in with a therapist for 45 minutes, you talk with your therapist and you make a plan, and then the rest of the week, that's when you're doing the heavy lifting, so to speak. An example of homework that you would get in cognitive behavioral therapy, if you were depressed, would be you would have to, say, record your negative thoughts, and then how you would have to write down how you challenged or tried to rationalize them. So an example would be like, you failed a test, so you write down, I'm too stupid for this class. And then you would have to say, no, I'm not too stupid for this class. What happened is I failed because I didn't study last time, but this time I studied and I'm going to be prepared. So I'm not too stupid, I just wasn't ready. That would be an example of the kind of entry you would put in. And cognitive behavioral therapy is not the only treatment for depression, as I mentioned. In a study done called a meta-analysis of cognitive behavioral therapy for adult depression alone and in comparison with other treatments, published by the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry in 2013, it said it is by far the most common form of therapy, as I said, for people with mood disorders, but other forms of therapy are just as effective. So I don't want to say like CBT is the only way you can treat depression, but others are just as useful and just as helpful. But CBT does have the advantage of being the most studied and the most done. So while some other people might do a different type of therapy, CBT, say has 100 people doing it, and another type of therapy has 10 people doing it, and they both have a 90% success rate, CBT looks a little better because that's 90 people as opposed to 9 people. So there's just more research done on it, so it has more reliable results. But also therapy isn't the only way to treat depression. You can also take medication, an antidepressant. That's an extremely common form of treatment. Medication isn't the same for every patient, so you might have to take several kinds before you see it actually starting to help with your depression. And for severe depression, it's usually recommended that you do medication on top of therapy, so you do like a double whammy and really try to knock it out, which is generally, even for people without severe depression who just have moderate or lesser depression, that's usually still recommended because it just helps more. Being proactive really helps more. So major depressive disorder is a serious illness, and mental illness is just as dangerous and damaging as any physical illness can be, so it's important to treat it as such. It can cause a wide variety of issues, so it's important to know, what the symptoms are to look for so that you can kind of, say, hey, red flag, maybe I'm depressed, maybe I should get checked out. And know that there are many types of therapy and many types of drugs that can help you deal with it. Thank you.